What if the man who built his empire on faith and redemption is now being accused of betrayal behind closed doors? In a bombshell $260 million lawsuit filed in Los Angeles, actor Derek Dixon, once a rising star on Tyler Perry's hit shows The Oval and Ruthless, claims he was lured with promises of success, only to be subjected to harassment, manipulation, and assault by the media mogul himself. From alleged groping in a private trailer to disturbing claims of retaliation when he refused Perry's advances, the details in this case are explosive. But Perry's legal team says it's all a lie, an elaborate scam to bring down a titan of Black Hollywood. Who's telling the truth? What really happened inside the studio gates? And what does this mean for the legacy of one of America's most powerful creators? Stay with us. This is a story of power, silence, and the price of saying no. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. A sprawling mansion, a billionaire filmmaker, a rising actor, a private encounter that one man says changed his life forever and another claims never happened. This isn't a Hollywood script. This is real life, and it's unfolding in front of the entire world. On Friday, June 13th, the entertainment industry was jolted when actor Derek Dixon filed a $260 million lawsuit against media titan Tyler Perry, a man long celebrated as a beacon of Black excellence and success. A cultural force who transformed pain into power and rags into a billion-dollar empire. But now, the same name that once symbolized resilience is being dragged into the courtroom under the weight of some of the most disturbing allegations imaginable. The claims are not vague. They are precise, explosive, and chilling. Dixon's complaint accuses Tyler Perry of not only making inappropriate advances but also orchestrating a coercive, exploitative dynamic under the guise of mentorship and career opportunity. In simpler terms, Dixon alleges that Perry used his power, wealth, and influence to pressure him into a relationship that blurred the lines between professionalism and manipulation, and when he didn't play along, the retaliation was swift. This isn't a minor skirmish. This is a legal war. A $260 million claim doesn't emerge quietly from thin air, especially not when the man being accused owns one of the largest film studios in the world and sits at the pinnacle of influence in both Hollywood and Atlanta. This is about more than just one actor and one director. This case threatens to shake the foundations of trust in an industry already rocked by scandal after scandal. And it's only just begun. But how did we get here? How does a man like Tyler Perry, who has spoken so passionately about abuse, brokenness, and justice, end up in the center of accusations involving the very abusive power he claimed to stand against? And who is Derek Dixon, this seemingly lesser-known actor whose story is now at the center of a storm that could potentially topple one of the most respected names in Black Hollywood? Let's rewind the clock. Back to the glittering night of September 2019. Tyler Perry had just achieved what many thought impossible, opening a massive studio complex on a former Confederate Army base in Atlanta, Georgia. Stars from every corner of the globe walked the red carpet, cameras flashing, champagne flowing. It was a night of triumph. But according to Dixon, it was also the night he first met Perry, a meeting that would allegedly spark a series of interactions and events that, over the next several years, would lead him to trauma, depression, and ultimately, a courtroom. At first, it all felt like a dream. Dixon, a young actor hungry for a breakthrough, found himself suddenly inside Tyler Perry's inner circle. He was offered roles on major TV projects like The Oval and Ruthless, both scripted, directed, and controlled by Perry himself. His character, Dale, quickly became a recurring presence, and as the show progressed, so did his proximity to Perry. But what started as professional soon turned, Dixon claims, into personal. Perry, he says, began sending him messages that hinted at more than just work. Offers of mentorship came wrapped in invitations to private meetings. Promises of career advancement were allegedly tied to the kind of favor exchange that made Dixon feel increasingly uneasy. Then, the accusations turned darker. According to the lawsuit, in January 2020, Perry invited Dixon to his home. There, Dixon says, Perry crossed the line physically. What was supposed to be a conversation about Dixon's role in The Oval allegedly became a moment of unwanted contact, one that left the actor shaken and confused. The next day, Perry offered him a regular contract on the show. To many, that might seem like a reward. But to Dixon, it felt like a transaction. He says Perry implied, both directly and indirectly, that his character's survival on the series depended on how happy Dixon could keep him off camera. These are not small allegations. These are detailed, time-stamped, and, if proven true, potentially career-ending. The lawsuit outlines not one but multiple incidents of alleged misconduct. Groping in a trailer. Inappropriate touching during a cash trip to the Bahamas in October 2020. A second alleged assault at Perry's home in June 2021. Dixon claims he was not only traumatized but also manipulated with raises, creative offers, and promises of long-term industry influence, all designed, he says, to keep him silent. By December 2020, the mental toll had caught up with him. Dixon says he began experiencing severe stress symptoms and was eventually placed on antidepressants. The environment, once vibrant with hope, had become toxic. His dream was morphing into a nightmare. But here's where the story takes a chilling turn. Even after the alleged misconduct, Dixon claims that offers kept coming. More money, more visibility, more scripts to write, more parts to play. Not because he was being recognized for his talent, he says, but because powerful people were trying to buy his silence. He refers to them as fixers, individuals in Perry's orbit who approached him with deals that sounded lucrative on the surface, but to him, felt more like hush contracts in disguise. In January 2023, he left the Oval, walked away, gave up a reported $400,000 in future earnings, and chose to file a lawsuit that could now change the course of not just his life, but the legacy of one of Hollywood's most celebrated figures. But of course, every story has two sides. Tyler Perry's legal team isn't sitting quietly. His attorney, Matthew Boyd, issued a statement calling the claims fabricated and accusing Dixon of trying to shake down a man who had, in their words, extended nothing but generosity. This is an individual who got close to Tyler Perry for what now appears to be nothing more than setting up a scam, Boyd stated. Tyler will not be shaken down, and we are confident these fabricated claims of harassment will fail. So what are we looking at here? A genuine story of abuse and manipulation by a powerful Hollywood figure, or a strategic lawsuit engineered by a man desperate for money and attention? That's what this video aims to unpack. Over the next chapters, we'll walk you through every detail of this explosive case. We'll hear from legal experts, look at the timeline of events, dissect both the claims and the denials, and examine the public response, both inside and outside Hollywood. We'll consider the broader implications for celebrity culture, power dynamics, and entertainment, and how the #MeToo movement's ripples are still being felt, now reaching the highest echelons of Black entertainment. This isn't just a case of he said. This is a test of transparency in a world built on illusion. A courtroom drama that could expose the fault lines behind Tyler Perry's empire. And depending on what happens next, it could redefine how we view one of the most powerful names in modern American storytelling. So stay with us, because what began as a glittering success story might now be collapsing under the weight of a voice that refused to stay silent, and a legal system that's about to decide which version of the truth the world will believe. Before the allegations, before the lawsuit, before his name was splashed across court documents and celebrity news headlines, Derek Dixon was just another actor grinding through the shadows of Hollywood. A face in a sea of hopefuls. A name not yet known. To understand the weight of his allegations, the scale of what he claims he endured, and the risk he took in coming forward, we must first understand the man behind the lawsuit. Who is Derek Dixon, really? And how did his life intersect so dramatically with one of the most powerful figures in the entertainment world? Derek Dixon was born in Atlanta, Georgia, in 1988, into a working-class family. His mother was a schoolteacher, and his father, a retired military man turned mechanic, ran a local garage. Dixon often credits his mother's love of classic films and literature for planting the seed of storytelling in him. She would recite scenes from Shakespeare at the dinner table and force the kids to reenact passages from August Wilson's plays. Dixon, the youngest of three boys, found solace and expression in performance. While his brothers excelled in sports and followed traditional careers, Derek took a different path. By high school, he had already made a name for himself in local theater competitions. Teachers praised his intensity, his vulnerability on stage, and his gift for slipping into characters effortlessly. But dreams and talent are not always enough. When he graduated, he lacked the money and connections to immediately enter the world of acting. He spent several years working odd jobs, from parking cars downtown to managing a food truck, all while taking night classes and auditioning whenever he could. In 2014, Dixon finally packed up his life and moved to Los Angeles. It wasn't glamorous. He slept on couches, hustled from casting call to casting call, and poured lattes in a coffee shop just blocks away from the big studios he dreamed of one day entering. His first screen time came as a blur, a background extra in a procedural drama. He didn't care. To him, it was proof he could get in. By 2017, he landed his first speaking role in an indie film that went to a small festival circuit. Reviews were mixed, but one thing was clear: Derek had presence. Still, the grind wore on. His big break didn't come from Hollywood, but from a chance opportunity, an invitation to attend the opening gala of Tyler Perry Studios in Atlanta in 2019. Dixon wasn't even an A-lister. He was accompanying a friend, a stylist who had dressed a few of the cast members from Perry's shows. According to Dixon, he was shocked when he found himself shaking hands with the man himself, Tyler Perry. It wasn't a long conversation, just a few sentences exchanged in the glow of camera flashes and champagne. But it was enough. Enough to plant a memory. Enough, Dixon says, for Perry to recognize him weeks later when their paths crossed again in Atlanta during a studio walkthrough for a new show. From that moment on, things began to change rapidly. Dixon says Perry reached out through an assistant, inviting him to audition for a small role in the Oval. He landed the part of Dale, a character originally intended for just 2 episodes. But the chemistry on set, combined with Dixon's raw energy, turned that minor role into a recurring one. Within months, Dale became a fan favorite, soft-spoken, introspective, and loyal, providing a steady moral compass amid a chaotic political thriller. It was a dream role. And for Dixon, it was validation after years of struggle. What he didn't expect, according to the lawsuit, was how quickly the boundaries between work and personal life began to blur. Dixon's suit claims that what started as mentorship, dinners, strategy sessions, long conversations about writing and directing quickly escalated into something else. Perry, he alleges, began communicating with him directly. At first, it was professional. Then it turned intimate. Compliments about his looks, subtle suggestions, offers that felt conditional. Dixon describes himself at that time as overwhelmed but cautious. He was still relatively unknown. Tyler Perry, on the other hand, was not just a director. He was an empire, a gatekeeper, a man whose green light could change your life overnight. The promise of being taken seriously as a creator, Dixon says, was intoxicating. Perry allegedly told him he saw a younger version of himself in him, someone who had struggled, who came from nothing, who wanted to use storytelling to change the world. The compliments were flattering. The opportunities were real. But beneath it all, Dixon now says, there was an unspoken pressure. That his success was not purely based on talent, but on his willingness to comply, to be pliable, to keep Perry happy. He claims that by late 2019, he started receiving direct messages that made him uncomfortable. Some were vague, hinting at deeper connections. Others, he says, were more explicit. But the stakes were high. And when Perry offered him a longer contract on the Oval, along with development talks for a potential spin-off that Dixon could write and star in, he signed. From the outside, it looked like he had made it. Inside, Dixon says, he was spiraling. Colleagues on set reportedly noticed a change in him by early 2020. One crew member, speaking on the condition of anonymity, described Dixon as driven but increasingly anxious. He began missing rehearsals. He'd disappear between takes. Some thought the pressure was just getting to him. No one imagined he was, allegedly, fighting an invisible battle. Trying to navigate a situation where saying no could mean losing everything he had worked for. The January 2020 visit to Perry's house, detailed in the lawsuit, marks a critical turning point. Dixon claims the visit was presented as a script discussion. But once inside, Perry allegedly made an advance that left him frozen. Dixon didn't respond. He left quickly, but shortly after, he was told his role was being expanded, that he would be a regular, that he would, in Perry's words, according to the complaint, never have to worry about money again. This mix of fear and reward is what Dixon says haunted him the most. On one hand, he was being offered everything he had ever wanted. On the other, he says he felt complicit in something that deeply violated his personal boundaries. Still, he stayed. For another year, he continued to film. But the sense of control he once felt began to erode. The incident in the trailer during filming of a dramatic scene, where Perry allegedly groped him, was, according to Dixon, not an isolated moment. It was part of a pattern. And when it repeated again during a cast retreat in the Bahamas, he says, he began documenting every uncomfortable moment. He saved messages, took notes, He began telling close friends bits and pieces, trying to prepare himself for what he feared he would one day have to do: leave. The decision to leave the Oval was not sudden. Dixon knew it meant walking away from hundreds of thousands of dollars, from visibility, from the highest point in his career. But by early 2023, he could no longer take it. He packed up, moved to California, and began working with legal counsel. It wasn't just about revenge. It was, he claims, about survival. Dixon's lawyers describe him as a man who was groomed, exploited, and discarded. The language is intentional, meant to frame the case not as a workplace disagreement, but as a form of long-term psychological and professional abuse. And the $260 million figure? That's not just about money. According to his team, it represents the total financial, emotional, and reputational damage inflicted on a man who trusted the wrong man. So where is he now? Today, Derek Dixon lives in a quiet rental home in the San Fernando Valley, far from the spotlight, far from studio backlots and red carpets. He's reportedly attending therapy twice a week. He's writing, working on a screenplay that, ironically, is about a young actor whose dreams become a nightmare inside the machine of power and illusion. He has given only one brief public statement since the lawsuit became public. "This was the hardest decision of my life. But silence helps no one. And I refuse to be silent anymore. No matter how this case ends, whether in a court of law or the court of public opinion, Derek Dixon has already changed the conversation. He stepped forward against a man whose public image is synonymous with morality, upliftment, and faith. And now, he must face the consequences of telling his truth. There are nights in a person's life that shimmer with the kind of promise that feels almost cinematic, surreal, golden, transformative. For Derek Dixon, one such night was the grand opening of Tyler Perry Studios on the historic Fort McPherson grounds in Atlanta, Georgia. It was September 2019. At the time, Dixon was still a largely unknown figure in the entertainment world, barely making a name for himself in small indie productions and the occasional commercial gig. But everything changed that evening, though not in the way he first imagined. Tyler Perry Studios wasn't just another Hollywood event. It was a declaration of cultural power, creative independence, and defiance of tradition. Perry had purchased the grounds of a former Confederate military base and turned it into the largest production studio owned by an African-American filmmaker in history. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. What was once a monument to oppression had now been transformed into a hub of Black creativity, excellence, and economic mobility. The event was flooded with A-list stars, political dignitaries, civil rights leaders, and journalists. Oprah Winfrey, Will Smith, Beyoncé, Denzel Washington, Spike Lee, they were all there. So was Tyler Perry himself, standing tall as the architect of it all, a man who rose from homelessness to billionaire status, redefining how Black stories could be told and who could tell them. Derek Dixon wasn't even on the official guest list. He had been brought along by a stylist friend who was dressing talent for the red carpet. Dixon had always been fascinated by Perry's rise, his relentless work ethic, his control over his own studio, his inspirational backstory. To be anywhere near that event was a dream. He didn't expect anything more than a glimpse. But fate had different plans. According to Dixon's account, he was standing near one of the VIP lounge areas, holding a drink, chatting with a few local artists, when a deep voice called out behind him. He turned to see Tyler Perry. The filmmaker didn't approach with pomp. He was casually observing the event, dressed modestly, without an entourage. Their initial interaction was brief, but it left a mark. Perry asked him his name, asked if he acted. Dixon says he answered honestly, nervously. Perry nodded. "I'll remember that," he allegedly said. And then he walked away. Dixon didn't sleep that night. He kept replaying the moment over and over, wondering if he'd misread it. Had Perry been genuinely interested, or was it a simple courtesy extended during a whirlwind event? He told a few friends, but he didn't expect anything to come of it. And then, 2 weeks later, an assistant from Tyler Perry Studios reached out. They wanted him to come in for a table read. A new drama series was in development, The Oval. The audition was unlike anything Dixon had experienced. It wasn't in a typical casting room in Los Angeles. It was on-site at Tyler Perry Studios. He was ushered through studio gates and walked past massive sound stages named after Black legends: the Oprah Winfrey Soundstage, the Denzel Washington Soundstage, the Halle Berry stage. It was overwhelming. When he stepped into the room, Perry was there. There were no cameras, no producers, no assistants, just Perry, a script, and a cold bottle of water on the table. "Let's read this together," Perry said. According to Dixon, they went through the scene 3 times. Perry gave notes. Smiled. "You've got something," he told him. "I see it. You're Dale." The role of Dale was not substantial at the time. He was a side character, a pharmacy worker with a simple story arc. But Perry told Dixon he wanted to build something special. "We'll grow this," he reportedly said. "If you trust me, I'll take care of you." It was every actor's dream. For Dixon, it felt like the breakthrough he had been clawing toward for years. But what came next, he would later describe as the slow construction of something far more complex, a dynamic where the lines between generosity and control, between opportunity and exploitation, began to blur. Shortly after being cast, Dixon was invited to a dinner at one of Perry's private residences near Buckhead. It wasn't unusual. Perry was known to mentor young actors and crew members. He often hosted dinners, strategy sessions, and writing retreats. At first, the atmosphere was casual and professional. Perry asked him questions about his goals, his background, and his ideas for future projects. Then the conversation reportedly took a turn. According to the lawsuit, Perry began asking personal questions about Dixon's relationships, his orientation, his boundaries. He allegedly spoke of the entertainment industry being a place where people needed to be fluid to survive. Dixon, feeling cornered but not overtly threatened, deflected the questions. He didn't want to risk offending the man who had just changed his life. But inside, he says, a sense of unease started to settle. What followed over the next few months was a flurry of communication. Perry allegedly began sending direct messages at all hours, some about scripts and logistics, others that Dixon says grew increasingly personal. Compliments about his appearance. Messages that seemed harmless at first, but, in hindsight, struck him as flirtatious. At times, Perry would invite Dixon to late-night walks across the studio lot, saying they needed to talk through Dale's development. The walks happened. So did the talks. But according to Dixon, so did the subtle hints of something more. When Dixon mentioned that he had been working on a pilot script for a drama series, Perry reportedly lit up. "Send it to me," he said. "Let's develop this together." Dixon was thrilled. They began having writing sessions, meetings about structure, themes, and potential casting. Perry's notes were detailed. He offered advice on how to sell the pitch to streaming platforms. But as Dixon now claims, every offer came with a string. He alleges that the more involved Perry became, the more he began to expect access, loyalty, and personal closeness. It wasn't written into contracts, Dixon says, but it was clear. Pulling away meant losing momentum. Creating distance meant risking it all. As their interactions deepened, so did Dixon's anxiety. He tried to convince himself that nothing was wrong. After all, Perry had given him a chance. Perry had taken him under his wing. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. By December 2019, Dixon's role on the Oval was officially expanded. New scripts began arriving with more scenes. His character was now entwined with key plot lines. He was given more press, more media training, more exposure. Perry reportedly began introducing him to executives as one to watch. Dixon smiled through it all, but privately, he says he was beginning to deteriorate. He began documenting their interactions, saving emails, screenshotting texts, making voice notes of what was said during meetings. He didn't plan to sue, he says. He just wanted to protect himself. He felt the walls closing in. The studio itself, though physically vast, became emotionally claustrophobic. Dixon describes it as a place where Perry's presence was felt everywhere. He directed every episode, wrote every script, handled casting personally. Nothing happened without his approval. For many, that control was what made Tyler Perry Studios efficient and successful. But for Dixon, it became a symbol of something more sinister, an environment where one man held absolute power, and where saying no was not a viable option. This was the setting that Derek Dixon claims created the coercive, exploitative dynamic detailed in his lawsuit. And it all began at what was supposed to be the proudest moment in Black entertainment history, the launch of a studio meant to uplift a new generation. A night of legacy. A night of power. A night that, for Derek Dixon, marked the start of a journey that would eventually lead to fear, trauma, and legal confrontation. But Perry, through his legal team, denies that any of this happened. They paint a very different picture, one of a man welcomed into a creative space, nurtured, mentored, and given every opportunity to succeed, only to betray that trust for personal gain. His attorney claims that Dixon fabricated the entire narrative after falling short in his career expectations. According to them, the lawsuit is a scam, a desperate attempt to destroy a man who has lifted so many. Two drastically different narratives. One starting in a dream studio, another ending in a courtroom. In between them stands a question that is yet to be answered. What really happened inside the gates of Tyler Perry Studios? When Derek Dixon landed the recurring role of Dale on the Oval, his life seemed to transform almost overnight. To the outside world, it was the classic underdog story, an unknown actor suddenly elevated to a regular on a nationally broadcast television show, part of Tyler Perry's creative universe. Fans began recognizing him. He gained followers. Casting directors who once ignored his calls started reaching out. On set, his trailer had his name on it. The scripts got thicker. The paychecks got larger. He was climbing the ladder. But inside, Dixon claims he wasn't rising, he was sinking. The rope he thought was lifting him up felt more and more like a leash. As his star rose publicly, the backstage reality, according to Dixon, began to warp into something darker. What the world saw as a mentorship between a powerful filmmaker and a rising actor, he claims, was actually a slow, calculated act of grooming. Not in the traditional, immediate sense, but through a gradual erosion of boundaries, trust, and power. It began with messages, and not just about lines or performance notes. They were compliments. Check-ins late at night. Messages about dreams, ambitions, what it meant to be chosen. According to Dixon, Perry told him more than once that he saw something special in him, that he had the kind of energy that couldn't be taught. But with every compliment, Dixon says, there was an undertone, a weight, as if the praise was not just encouragement, but currency, something that would be given only if something else was quietly offered in return. It wasn't overt, not at first, but it was constant, and subtle, and unrelenting. What made it so confusing, Dixon claims, was the blending of professional promises with personal favors. Perry allegedly told him that Dale's storyline was his to shape, that if he wanted to direct an episode or write a scene, he'd be given the chance, that he had access to rooms most young actors could only dream of. Dixon was invited to creative meetings that other cast members never even knew existed. Perry reportedly told him that he was going to develop a pilot around him, a bold, edgy drama that would shock the industry. At first, Dixon was overwhelmed with gratitude. He had struggled for nearly a decade just to get a line in a commercial. And now, here was one of the most powerful people in the entertainment business handing him opportunity after opportunity. But there was a price, he says. It wasn't written in the contract. It was never said aloud, but it was felt. The conversations that started as creative soon became intimate. Perry allegedly began referencing Dixon's appearance more often. Jokes about what he was wearing. Suggestions about working out together. Requests for late-night meetings at Perry's private office. One of the most telling patterns Dixon documented in his journal was the way Perry would allegedly test his boundaries. He might begin a conversation about a script and slowly steer it into personal territory. You ever been with someone who believed in you more than you believed in yourself? Perry allegedly asked during one meeting. Because I see you, and I want to help you get where you deserve to be. But that only works if we're honest, if we're open, if we trust each other. Dixon says he didn't know how to respond. Part of him wanted to believe this was genuine, that he had finally found someone who saw him as more than just a headshot. But the other part, the one silenced by fear, began to panic. He feared that if he spoke out, he'd be painted as ungrateful, difficult, or worse, disposable. After all, Perry wasn't just his boss. He was the studio, the director, the creator, the executive producer. The final say on everything. And Perry didn't just control the scripts. He controlled the tone on set. Cast members reportedly felt enormous loyalty toward him, and few would dare challenge his decisions. Dixon described the environment as tight-knit and loyal, but also intimidating. There was an unspoken understanding. To be at Tyler Perry Studios was to be part of something bigger, and if you were given a seat at the table, you didn't question how you got it. The lawsuit references this culture directly. It calls it a deliberately cultivated power structure, where Perry allegedly used emotional, financial, and creative incentives to condition compliance. Dixon describes multiple incidents where declining an invitation, even something as simple as skipping a private dinner, led to tension. He began noticing changes in how Perry treated him. Texts would stop for days, then return with casual familiarity, as if testing how much distance Dixon would tolerate before pulling himself back in. Then came the private dinners. According to Dixon, there were several one-on-one dinners at Perry's residence between December 2019 and April 2020. At these dinners, Perry allegedly oscillated between discussing scripts and making personal advances. He would compliment Dixon's looks, his charisma, his presence. He would talk about intimacy as a form of creative honesty. On one occasion, Dixon claims, Perry said, "The people I trust most are the ones who let me see who they really are, not just on camera." It was during this period, Dixon alleges, that Perry began introducing new offers, not just roles, but partnerships. "Let's co-write something together," he allegedly said. "Let's develop a character based on your life." Dixon says he wanted to believe it was about talent, but it didn't feel that way. He says it felt like leverage. A slow layering of dependency. That if he ever decided to walk away, Perry could simply shut off the faucet. By mid-2020, Dixon was at the height of his exposure. The Oval was doing well. His character had become integral to the plot. Fans posted about Dale online. Interviews were lined up. For the first time, Dixon had representation. He was even invited to speak on a panel about emerging black actors. But behind the camera, he says, he was unraveling. He began missing phone calls. His replies to Perry became shorter, colder. And then came the threats, not explicit, but heavily implied. After a scene in which Dixon's character was shot, Perry allegedly told him, "We'll see if Dale makes it to the end of the season. Depends how things go." Dixon was terrified. He felt trapped. He didn't want to lose everything he had gained, but he also didn't want to keep living under the pressure of unspoken expectations. The lawsuit makes special mention of this moment. The blending of fiction and reality. That Perry would allegedly use the fate of Dixon's character as a way of asserting control over his real-life decisions. If true, it's one of the most alarming aspects of the case, that an actor's professional survival was tied not to performance, but to personal compliance. Dixon says he tried to confide in a crew member, someone he had grown close to. But the response was tepid. "You know how it is," they allegedly told him. "That's how this business works." He realized that speaking out meant more than just risking his job. It meant breaking the unspoken rule of silence that protected powerful people. And he wasn't ready yet. Still, Dixon kept collecting evidence. He saved text messages, log call times, recorded voice memos describing events while they were still fresh in his memory. And he began going to therapy, quietly, through a private practice in downtown Atlanta. His therapist, who was expected to testify if the case goes to trial, reportedly noted signs of chronic stress, disassociation, and early symptoms of depression. By December 2020, Dixon was prescribed antidepressants. What should have been the prime of his career had become a slow collapse. He lost weight. His eyes dulled. Co-stars later recalled how he began staying in his trailer between scenes, avoiding eye contact, rehearsing alone. He was no longer the bright young actor they had met a year before. Something was wrong, but no one knew what. And no one, it seemed, was willing to ask. The turning point came in spring 2021, during a shoot at one of Perry's private residences used for exterior scenes. Dixon claims that after the final shot of the day, he was invited into the main house to review some material. Inside, he alleges, Perry made another physical advance, one that left him shaken to the core. It wasn't violent, he says, but it was direct and undeniable. This, for Dixon, was the final straw. He left abruptly, got into his car, and drove around the city for hours. He didn't sleep that night. He barely spoke for days. The next week, he called his attorney. And yet, he still didn't quit. Not yet. Dixon stayed on the show for the remainder of 2021, fulfilling his contract. But his performance suffered. His energy shifted. Fans noticed. Online forums speculated that Dale's storyline had lost steam. What they didn't know was that Dixon was living in quiet fear, calculating every move, preparing for an exit he hoped wouldn't destroy his future. In early 2022, he declined an offer to sign a new 3-season contract. According to the complaint, this decision was met with immediate coldness. Communication with Perry allegedly ceased. The development meetings were canceled. The pilot project was never mentioned again. Dixon's character was slowly written out. The final script he received didn't include a dramatic exit. Just silence. Absence. As if he had never been there. In January 2023, he officially walked away. From the Oval. From the studio. From the entire world he had once prayed to enter. And within months, the legal paperwork was drafted. The journal entries were turned into timelines. The messages were printed and cataloged. The recordings were transcribed. The lawsuit was filed. To the world, Derek Dixon was a breakout star who vanished. But in truth, he was a man drowning in a sea of promises, manipulation, and fear until he chose to resurface. This wasn't just the rise of a star. It may have been, as he claims, the grooming of a victim. January 2020. It was supposed to be the month that marked Derek Dixon's full transformation from supporting character to staple figure in Tyler Perry's television empire. Contracts were being finalized. His name was being added to major scripts. For the first time in his career, he felt visible, not just as a performer, but as a potential creator. But behind the scenes, beneath the paper trail of opportunity, Dixon says he was already suffocating under a silence he didn't know how to break. This section of the lawsuit doesn't rely on vague references or passive implications. It outlines a night, a location, and a set of events that Dixon alleges changed everything. According to court filings, Dixon was invited to Tyler Perry's private home in Atlanta one evening in mid-January 2020. The invitation, he claims, came under the pretense of reviewing character notes for his expanded role on The Oval. Dixon says the call came from a production assistant, passing on word from Perry himself. He'd like to go over some ideas with you tonight, privately. Can you be there by 7? The home, located in a gated neighborhood known for housing Atlanta's elite, was the same estate Perry had showcased in interviews. A sprawling, palatial property known for its modern architecture and sweeping views. Dixon showed up on time, dressed casually, carrying his annotated scripts and a notepad. He was nervous, but excited. He had been told this meeting would be significant. As he pulled up to the property, a staff member greeted him at the gate and led him through the expansive interior to a private study near the rear of the house. Perry was already there, sitting with a laptop open and several scripts laid across the desk. For the first 20 minutes, everything felt normal, Dixon recalls. They went over scene progression, discussed the arc of Dale's relationship with other characters, and brainstormed ideas for making the storyline more emotionally compelling. Perry was attentive, involved, animated, traits he was known for in the writer's room. Then, as Dixon alleges, the conversation shifted. It started subtly. Perry leaned back, relaxed, and began asking more personal questions. How Dixon was adjusting to the sudden visibility, whether he had someone to talk to about the pressures of the industry. Then came questions about his relationships. Was he seeing anyone? Was he comfortable with attention from men as well as women? Dixon says he was caught off guard, but tried to keep the conversation neutral, steering it back toward work. Perry allegedly smiled and said, "You don't have to be shy. This is your safe space. You're here now. You're in the family." Dixon claims he gave a forced laugh and looked back at his notepad, hoping the moment would pass. That's when Perry, he says, moved in closer. According to the legal filing, Perry reached over, put a hand on Dixon's leg, and said something that made Dixon freeze. "There are ways we can make each other stronger, if you're open." Dixon alleges that the contact lingered, and the look on Perry's face made the intention unmistakable. He stood up abruptly, muttering something about needing to use the restroom, and left the study. He didn't go back. Instead, Dixon walked out of the house, got into his car, and sat in the driveway for nearly 20 minutes, processing what had just happened. He didn't cry. He didn't call anyone. He just sat there, staring at the steering wheel, heart pounding, trying to calculate what this moment meant for his life and career. He didn't report the incident, not to the studio, not to an agent, not even to a friend. Not yet. At that moment, Dixon says, he didn't fully comprehend what had happened. There had been no physical violence. No shouting. Just a touch. Just a few words. But it was what they am. In the days following the encounter, Dixon says his communication with Perry became erratic. He ignored messages at first, unsure of how to respond. Then, Perry allegedly sent a text that read simply, "Hope I didn't scare you. We're good. Let's talk soon." Dixon didn't respond. But within the week, he received news that his character was being promoted to regular cast status and that he would be getting a pay bump. To an outsider, it might seem like a reward earned through performance. But to Dixon, the timing felt like a consequence, wrapped in a paycheck. It was as if Perry was saying, "You know what I want. You don't have to say yes, but I still own the board." This moment, Dixon's lawsuit claims, marked the true beginning of a psychological tug-of-war that would last for more than a year. From this point forward, everything in Dixon's life began to fracture. He says he lost his appetite. He became irritable on set. He began avoiding Perry entirely, using assistants as go-betweens whenever possible. But avoidance, he discovered, was its own form of defiance. It didn't go unnoticed. Dixon claims that scenes began arriving with unexpected script revisions, lines that painted Dale in a weaker or less sympathetic light. Entire subplots he had helped build were scrapped. He was told it was a matter of creative direction, but he didn't buy it. In one instance, during a rehearsal for a climactic scene in which Dale was supposed to confront a corrupt official, Dixon says Perry rewrote the script last minute so that his character backed down instead. "It's more realistic this way," Perry allegedly said in front of the cast. "You're not that guy." To Dixon, it felt like a public dig. A reminder. Despite the tension, Dixon didn't quit. Not yet. He told himself he could weather the storm. That if he just delivered solid performances, he could reframe the narrative. But the pressure mounted. He started seeing a therapist in secret. The sessions were revealing. He described the January incident, the aftermath, the Cold War he felt brewing between himself and Perry. The therapist advised him to begin documenting everything: times, places, comments, moods. Dixon started carrying a small notebook in his bag. He wrote down everything he could remember about that night, filling pages with observations, direct quotes, and emotional reactions. Around this time, he also began hearing rumors, whispers from background actors and production staff about special treatment, about how Perry favored certain people. No one said anything explicitly, but the implication hung in the air. And every time Dixon felt tempted to speak out, he thought of what it would cost him. Contracts, future editions, reputation. The industry was small. Tyler Perry wasn't just a boss. He was a brand, a gatekeeper. If you were blacklisted from his circle, it could mean the end. So Dixon stayed silent. He filmed. He smiled in interviews. He tweeted quotes about hard work and staying grateful. But inside, he says, he was unraveling. He felt like a fraud, a puppet, someone slowly being erased while still standing in the spotlight. His journal entries from that period, submitted as part of the court filing, paint a portrait of a man caught in an emotional no-man's land. One entry dated February 9, 2020, reads, "I feel sick. Every time he walks into the room, I want to disappear. But I can't. Because I need this job. Because I need this dream to still be real." Another entry from March reads, "What do you call it when someone gives you the world, but they hold the receipt over your head every day? Is that gratitude? Or is it extortion?" By April, Dixon was exhausted. He claims he confronted Perry for the first time during a break between takes. The conversation was brief and tense. He didn't bring up the January incident directly. Instead, he told Perry he felt uncomfortable with the tone of their relationship. According to Dixon, Perry smiled, leaned in, and whispered, "Don't confuse discomfort with growth." Then he walked away. This moment, cryptic and dismissive, is described in the lawsuit as emblematic of the entire power dynamic. No outright threats. Just enough ambiguity to maintain control. Enough charm to keep people guessing. Dixon left the set early that day. When he returned the next morning, his trailer had been moved. Not far. Just a few feet across the lot. But to him, it was symbolic. A shift. A message. From that point forward, he says, the warm invitations ceased. The friendly messages stopped. Perry no longer addressed him directly on set. All communication came through intermediaries. But the underlying pressure, Dixon claims, remained. The January 2020 incident became a ghost in every room he entered. Every new script brought anxiety. Every casting change sparked paranoia. Every public compliment from Perry made him feel exposed. He didn't know who to trust. He didn't know what was safe to say. And the longer he kept quiet, the more he blamed himself. In May 2020, Dixon was approached by one of Perry's longtime assistants, who allegedly told him that Perry was still willing to make things right. The assistant didn't elaborate, but handed Dixon a flash drive containing drafts of a new pilot project, a character-driven drama featuring a lead role that Perry said he had written with Derek in mind. It was, Dixon says, another offer wrapped in a gesture of peace. But to him, it felt like bait. He never opened the file. That summer, as the pandemic disrupted shooting schedules and the world turned inward, Dixon took time to reflect. He began compiling everything, notes, texts, emails, journal entries, into a personal archive. He wasn't ready to go public, but he knew he might need to someday. That someday came in the months that followed. But January 2020 remained a pivot point. The night he says everything changed. The moment when, according to him, the opportunity became a trap. The praise became manipulation. The mentor became the man he feared the most. Whether the court will accept this version of events remains to be seen. But in Derek Dixon's narrative, the alleged assault at Perry's home wasn't just a personal violation. It was the moment when the balance of power was exposed for what it truly was, not a partnership, but a cage. As the cameras rolled and the show gained traction with audiences nationwide, Derek Dixon's character on the Oval became increasingly essential to the story's progression. Fans speculated about Dale's fate, tuned in weekly to watch his storyline develop, and posted fan theories on message boards and social media. Behind the curtain, however, Dixon says a different narrative was playing out, one that had little to do with art and everything to do with control. And at the center of that control, he alleges, was a subtle but unrelenting message from Tyler Perry himself: "Keep me happy." These 3 words, Dixon claims, weren't always spoken directly, but they were implied in gestures, in changes to scripts, in private interactions, and in the very structure of how decisions were made at Tyler Perry Studios. Unlike traditional television sets where a team of writers, directors, producers, and executives weigh in on the development of characters and plot lines, the Oval was, and still is, largely the vision of a single man, Tyler Perry. He writes the episodes, directs them, and produces them. What he says goes. There are no checks and balances. There are no filters. For most actors, that kind of streamlined control is an advantage. For Derek Dixon, it became a source of constant pressure and psychological exhaustion. After the alleged assault in January 2020, Dixon says he returned to work determined to maintain professionalism and focus on the job. He didn't want his personal discomfort to interfere with his role. But things had already shifted. He claims Perry began using Dale's storyline as a way to test boundaries, dole out approval, or punish resistance. When Dixon responded promptly to messages or participated in offset meetings, he says his character was featured more heavily. When he pulled back, or avoided personal interactions, the scripts reflected it. For example, in one episode initially planned to center around Dale's emotional journey through grief, Dixon was told by production staff the morning of the shoot that the episode had been rewritten overnight. Instead of Dale taking center stage, his scenes were slashed by half, and his emotional monologue was replaced with a few short lines of dialogue. "It's a pacing issue," the crew reportedly explained. But Dixon knew better. According to his journal, he had missed a private meeting with Perry just 2 days earlier. On another occasion, Dixon claims he was pulled aside by a member of Perry's inner circle and advised to show a little more warmth toward the boss. "This is a family," they allegedly said. "We support each other here. Don't let your silence look like distance." Dixon describes the moment as both surreal and threatening, not overtly coercive, but wrapped in Southern charm, as though professional cooperation also required personal availability. This kind of emotional ambiguity, he says, became the norm. Perry never directly threatened to write him off the show. He didn't need to. The unspoken power dynamics, Dixon alleges, spoke volumes. And it was this dance of implied consequence that left him feeling powerless. The phrase, "keep me happy," according to Dixon, was mentioned during a conversation in March 2020. After a long day of shooting, he was called into Perry's trailer. The conversation began with praise, how much Perry appreciated his work, how valuable his contributions had been to the season. Then, the tone shifted. Perry reportedly told him that he had a plan to develop Dale even further. "You could become one of the central figures on this show," he allegedly said. "But that only happens if we're on the same page. You understand? I need to know you're all in. No distance. No secrets. Just honesty. Keep me happy, and I'll keep you rising." Dixon didn't respond. He nodded, said thank you, and exited the trailer. But internally, he says, he was shaken. What did "keep me happy" mean in this context? Was it about following directions as an actor? Or was it a subtle warning not to resist Perry's personal advances? Whatever it was, Dixon believed that his value on set had less to do with talent and more to do with his perceived loyalty to Perry, not as a professional, but as a person. It wasn't just conversations or rewritten scripts. Dixon also points to moments during production where he felt isolated or excluded. He stopped being invited to certain cast meetings. Group photos and promotional materials began to feature him less prominently. In interviews, Perry referred to other actors by name, praising their commitment, their friendship. Dixon, once a favored mentee, had seemingly become invisible, at least on the surface. But the tension behind the scenes continued to simmer. One of the most disturbing allegations in this part of the lawsuit involves a scene filmed in April 2020, where Dixon's character was attacked by another cast member's character during a dramatic confrontation. Originally, the scene was supposed to end with Dale surviving and getting rushed to the hospital. But at the last minute, Dixon claims the scene was rewritten so that Dale was shot, leaving his fate ambiguous. Dixon was informed of the change just hours before filming and was reportedly told by a crew member, "It's just to raise the stakes. Doesn't mean you're out. It depends on how the audience responds," and other things. To Dixon, this felt like another test, a way to apply pressure, to remind him that his character's life, and by extension, his job, was tied to forces he couldn't control, that his continued presence on the show wasn't about ratings or writing. It was about compliance. His notes from that day described the scene as a performance under surveillance, a moment when he realized that everything he did on screen was being weighed against what he didn't do off-screen. The psychological toll grew heavier. Dixon began experiencing sleep disturbances. He had recurring dreams of being trapped in a studio set that looked like a home, but the doors wouldn't open. He developed anxiety attacks before filming days. He took breaks in between takes just to sit in silence to try and calm his nerves. One co-star, who was asked to remain anonymous, told legal investigators that they witnessed Dixon change completely during this time, describing him as withdrawn, distracted, not himself. And yet, he kept going, kept filming, kept showing up, because the alternative was terrifying. He feared being labeled difficult, the kiss of death in an industry where reputations are everything. And he feared what would happen if he spoke out, whether anyone would believe him, whether the public would accuse him of trying to destroy a Black success story. That's one of the undercurrents running through this entire ordeal, the cultural weight of Tyler Perry's legacy. To criticize Perry is, in some corners, seen as a betrayal. He's not just a filmmaker, he's a symbol of resilience, of Black ownership, of faith-based storytelling. Dixon knew this. Everyone in the industry did. To challenge him meant risking exile, not just from the show, but from the broader community of opportunity. Still, Dixon began pulling away. He started turning down social invitations. He stopped engaging with Perry off set. And then, in late spring 2020, he received a visit from a representative of Perry's production office. The representative allegedly told him that they were considering Dale for a major upcoming arc in Season 2. "But it's important we're on solid ground," the representative allegedly said. "You've been a little distant. Tyler doesn't like unpredictability. If we're going to build something big with you, we need trust. We need to know you're still in this with us." To Dixon, the message was clear. His future depended not just on acting, but on obedience, on being available, on being silent. The phrase, "keep me happy," became, in his mind, the defining motif of their relationship. It wasn't about friendship. It wasn't even about mentorship. It was about control. And the more he resisted, the more precarious his position became. His scenes were cut. His name dropped from press kits. Co-stars were told to limit their conversations with the media about Dale. It was as if his character was being slowly erased without ever being officially removed. By the end of summer 2020, Dixon reached a breaking point. He went on a 2-week medical leave, citing exhaustion. In reality, he says, he was trying to decide whether to walk away. He met with legal advisors but didn't file anything yet. He wanted to see if he could salvage his career without igniting a war. But when he returned to set, the temperature had dropped even further. Perry no longer acknowledged him. Directors on set gave him minimal direction. Writers stopped consulting him about Dale's arc. It was clear he was on borrowed time. The final straw, Dixon claims, came in October 2020 when a new writer was brought in to consult on the series. During an informal meet and greet, Dixon overheard the writer asking about the Dale character. A senior producer allegedly replied, "We're not sure how much longer he'll be around. Depends on whether he plays nice." The phrase stayed with him. Plays nice. What did that mean, exactly? Was it about performance? Or about obedience? Dixon knew then that his fears weren't in his head. They were embedded in the very language of the set. By the time Season 2 wrapped, Dixon had made up his mind. He would finish his contract, but he wouldn't return. And in January 2023, he walked away for good. In hindsight, he describes the "keep me happy" ethos as a trap disguised as opportunity. A promise that was never about creativity, but about control. And in walking away, he knew he wasn't just leaving a job. He was risking his entire future. The storm had not passed. Derek Dixon, now immersed in a web of psychological pressure and professional uncertainty, found himself still bound to a production cycle that required his body, voice, and emotion, while eroding his mental health day by day. According to his lawsuit, what had begun with disturbing undertones in Atlanta metastasized into physical escalation in locations far removed from public scrutiny. The two most damning incidents beyond the initial January 2020 assault, Dixon alleges, occurred in two private spaces, the trailer and a secluded resort in the Bahamas. These weren't abstract feelings or subtle innuendos anymore. These, he claims, were moments of direct, unwanted physical contact that left emotional scars and solidified his resolve to eventually step away. By mid-2020, the Oval was in full swing, and Perry had transitioned the cast and crew into an aggressive shooting schedule. Known for filming entire seasons in a matter of weeks, Perry's sets were notoriously fast-paced and tightly controlled. Every day was long, every take was precise, and every decision came from the top down. Dixon, still holding the role of Dale, now had regular lines, emotional scenes, and on-screen time that required deeper character work. His performance drew attention, and his name began circulating beyond Tyler Perry Studios. But while fans saw a rising actor blooming under Perry's watchful direction, Dixon says he was spiraling, constantly anticipating the next shift in his storyline, whether based on narrative needs or his personal distance from Perry. Still, he carried on. Until, as he describes, a day in late August 2020 when a scripted moment turned into something deeply inappropriate and terrifying. According to the lawsuit, on the day of the trailer incident, Dixon was filming a high-stakes emotional confrontation. His character had just been ambushed, and Dale was supposed to deliver a scene filled with grief, betrayal, and subtle rage. The shoot was scheduled to take place in an indoor set built within a soundstage. After wrapping the scene, Dixon returned to his private trailer, standard issue on the set, but outfitted for rest and personal preparation. He expected silence. He expected time to reset. Instead, he says, Perry entered unannounced, citing a need to discuss the performance. Dixon claims that Perry sat down beside him, unusually close. The room was small, barely large enough to fit two adults comfortably. The air was tight. Dixon was still in costume, sweat trickling down his temple, emotionally exhausted from the intensity of the performance. He says Perry praised his work, then slowly turned the conversation personal. Again, questions about his feelings, his emotional availability, his ability to connect. Dixon tried to deflect, standing up to grab water, hoping to break the intimacy of the setting. That's when Perry, he claims, made physical contact. According to Dixon's statement, Perry approached him from behind, put his hands on his shoulders, and leaned close enough that Dixon could feel his breath. "You were incredible today," Perry allegedly said. "So raw, so open. That's what I want to see. That's what I want to feel." Then, without invitation or warning, Dixon alleges Perry's hands moved downward, grazing over his chest and sides, and momentarily pressing against his waist. Dixon froze. The door was shut. The room felt too small, too silent. He didn't say a word. He reached for the doorknob and quietly stepped outside. He didn't scream. He didn't confront. He just walked away. To onlookers, he appeared calm, perhaps tired. But inside, Dixon says, he was fracturing. This wasn't the first incident. This was part of a pattern. And the fact that it happened in such a personal space, his trailer, the one place where actors typically feel protected, only intensified the betrayal. After that day, Dixon wrote a detailed account in his journal. He noted the time, the exact location, what he was wearing, how Perry moved, and the words exchanged. This became one of the cornerstones of the eventual lawsuit, his detailed recollections from moments he says were burned into his psyche. He told no one, not yet. But a few weeks later, the production shifted to what was supposed to be a reward, a cast trip to the Bahamas. The Bahamas shoot was framed by Perry's team as a break from routine, a creative retreat to capture background scenes for an upcoming season while also offering cast bonding and rest. The resort, located on a secluded portion of one of the islands, was luxurious and private. Only selected cast members and a reduced crew were invited. Dixon received his invitation via direct message from one of Perry's assistants. He was told that Perry had specifically asked for him to join. Dixon hesitated. Every instinct in him screamed caution. But saying no meant distancing himself further from the production. He was still under contract. Refusing to go without clear reason would be seen as insubordination. So, Reluctantly, he agreed. The trip began smoothly. The group filmed several scenes along the beach and in nearby villas. During the day, everything appeared normal, professional, organized. Dixon was cordial with Perry, keeping interaction minimal but respectful. He avoided late-night gatherings and focused on work. But on the third night, things changed. According to Dixon's statement, the cast and crew were invited to a private dinner hosted by Perry in one of the resort's elite suites. It was intimate, about a dozen people. Wine was served. The mood was light. Perry gave a speech about gratitude, creative growth, and the power of trusting one another. It was, in Dixon's words, eerily familiar. The same kind of rhetoric that often preceded personal overtures. Dixon left the dinner early, citing fatigue. He returned to his room and locked the door. About 30 minutes later, there was a knock. Dixon checked the peephole. It was Perry. Alone. Panic hit. Dixon stood frozen. He didn't answer. The knock came again, softer this time. Then silence. After a minute, he heard the sound of footsteps retreating. He exhaled. But the next day, during a break in filming, Dixon says Perry approached him directly, taking him aside and whispering, "You don't have to be scared of me. I just want you to trust me. I would never hurt you. But we need to be aligned." Dixon offered no response. Perry smiled and walked away. Later that evening, Dixon was called to a private villa under the pretense of discussing a reshoot. When he arrived, only Perry was there. The air was tense. According to Dixon, Perry offered him a drink, which he declined. Then, in what Dixon described as a calculated shift, Perry allegedly stood behind him, placing a hand on his neck, gently pressing his fingers along his jawline, and whispering, "You're going to be a star, Dale. But only if you stop fighting me." Dixon pulled away. Politely but firmly, he excused himself. Perry reported